Retiring is fun when you get speeches like this. I will, first off, I do want to say to Amy how much Marcel and I appreciate. We've known Amy and her family all these years. We get together. We find one thing is that we can joke with you and talk about things, and know we keep each other's confidence. And although I'm thinking some of the things we've said would be worthwhile, we just had I mean, Amy is a superb chair of the Rules Committee, but everything else did. I was so eager to have her come on Judiciary Committee. I must admit to some partiality toward former prosecutors. And we saw how that worked, because I remember when somebody from another administration, a witness, tried to snow her one time. She sat there very much and said, "Do you mean by that?" And choom, 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 this knife comes out, and that was the end of that. And just a couple weeks ago, a major piece of legislation, she had worked a long time to put together a coalition to get the senior Republican on the committee to join with her, as she was able to do other times. But we had to have at least, and we're all there ready to vote for it. And we had one member who wanted to play for the cameras, a man from Texas named Ted Cruising or something like that. And sorry, Ted. If you complain about me not being polite to other senators, complain to the President Pro Tem of the Senate. Anyway, it takes a moment. He goes on just aiming for the cameras. Amy just sat there, listened to him. When he finished, clerk will call the roll. She won. He got one vote, his. She got every single vote, and this is a committee. The Rules Committee goes across the clerk's board. I said to her as we were leaving the committee room, I said, that was a little bit more effective than going and pointing out all the errors of what he had to say. She did tell me that, Patrick, it's always better to win than to lose. And I said, I kind of like that. And I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're here to spend time with my successor to be in the Senate, Peter Welch. You're going to find that he does the things that you've done so effectively in bringing people together, Republicans and Democrats, building coalitions. As you know, we have some who talk about the wonderful things that they may do, then others who do them. He'll be among those who do them, like you. And I appreciate both of you very much. And when Ellen Lovell spoke up here, she is such a dear friend to both Marcel and myself. And we have traveled in some god-awful war zones and everything else, but we've also had times when we sit there and another company in Washington and talking, and I'm listening to Ellen, and it was because of Ellen I began a statement that my head of the Vermont office, John Tracy, who's here, has heard me say many times, senators are merely constitutional impediments to their staff. And I kind of like it. It means they do all the work, I get all the credit, and we can work together. And so many things that I wanted to do, and it took a while to do it. You mentioned organic farming as chair of the Agriculture Committee. Jesse Helms just blocked it. Then I became chair and put together a coalition with Dick Ruger, Republican senator, and we got it done. And when Amy talked about Hubert Humphrey, I learned how you did put coalition. I've been in the Senate for about 3 or 4 months as a junior most. In fact, I've been greeted by one of the very senior senators. My first day there was, "How old are you, boy?" And I said, "Well, he's 35 next year, Mr. Chairman. Anybody ever tell you you're too young to be in the United States Senate?" I said, "Yeah, my opponent for one." Well, we actually got along. We actually got along well after that because I didn't back down to him like most people do. But Senator Humphrey, I was still calling him Senator Humphrey, and he kept saying it's Hubert. So Senator Humphrey comes up and says, "Pat, you ever been to Moscow?" And I said, "Well, Moscow, Vermont, Mr. Chairman." "No," he said, "I got to go over and visit Brezhnev, and I want you and Marcel to come." Now, remember, I had just been in a race where I think the National Democratic Committee was so enthused about me, they sent me either $500 or $1,000. We were living on small contributions here in Vermont. We maxed out our credit cards, mortgaged our house and everything else, and flat broke. And I sort of blurted out, "Well, what's the airfare to Moscow?" He said, no, we're going to take Jerry's plane. I said, "Jerry who?" He says, "Jerry Ford, he's the president. Don't you read the papers?" And, but you know what I learned from that? And he goes, so we went over it. Here's a large delegation, a dozen or so senators. His co-chair on it, who he picked, was Hugh Scott, the Republican leader. And the example he said, he had an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. And we sit in that big airplane, and I'm like, it's a little bit better than the computers we use from Burlington. And, just, I got to take a phone call here in the airplane, this kind of thing. But I learned how important it was to have these kind of things. We had both Republicans and Democrats. A long trip, you sit around and talk with each other. You find you have things in common. And I've done that everywhere. I've gone, whether it's Vietnam or war zones or pleasant occasions like interparliamentary meetings in Europe. In fact, I've never been to the Paris Air Show, and I turn it down every year, and the one who was going, Senator Shelby, comes up to me and said, "Pat, you got to come to one of these. You got to bring Marcel because she speaks Franque." And it took me a while to figure out referring to Marcel's first language as the daughter of Canadian immigrants being French. "Oh, go ahead. Oui. C'est vrai." Let me tell you how she turned around boats in the Northeast Kingdom. We campaign, everybody's in, we'd pick out people with a heavy Canadian accent or French accent, and they were, we don't know much about you. And she started speaking to them in French and said, "Oh, Madame, vous parlez français avec l'accent Québécois?" "Oui, my parents." And she goes, "Where you're from?" Well, I had their votes. They didn't give a damn how I felt. In fact, one person was overheard after. I said, "Well, that Leahy's not very smart, but his wife is one of us, and he probably needs a job, so we'll vote for it." And I relied on volunteers. People came forward. I had this young volunteer, a young lawyer, who said, "Well, I'm from the other side of the state. I can help you. My name is Peter Welch." And Peter was there. And we've worked with each other. We've even tried to emulate each other's haircuts. But Peter Peter then went on, to become President Pro Tem of the Senate, elected unanimously, as I recall, and has been this tremendous force in the House. And Peter, I've told you personally, I'll tell you publicly, I'm so proud you're going to be following me when I leave there in the Senate. Back in '74, we had, we called, or what, actually the Free Press, back when it was a major source of news here, called, no, I don't mean that derogatory sense of just the facts, man. We had a dear friend, Paul Brune, and Marcel on my side, and our kids along with us, unless we could find a babysitter. Fortunately, we had a wonderful, wonderful young college student who volunteered to watch our irascible children. Her name was Mary Sullivan, who's sitting right here. And off we went. Afterward, when I won, I remember one of the headlines, or two headlines, 5 days apart. One was poll dooms Leahy. It's 5 days before the election. And that he's down 35 points and blah, blah, blah. I thought, well, this is not going to make for a fun weekend. And we just redoubled our efforts. And the next 5 days later, the headline was Leahy unexpectedly wins. But then the newspapers did retrospectives. Well, said one, he had a secret weapon, Marcel. And they were saying that the picture, but she wasn't secret to the people. Saw her. She was campaigning every single day all over. The two of us would be driving back, trying to stay awake. We had the windows open in the car. We had the radio on loud. And I was state's attorney at that time. It was reputed a couple of times about 2 o'clock in the morning, because they had a police radio and siren and speaker, that somebody in a deep voice in the car going through a rural area, you would hear, "This is God." As we drove by, lights would go on in houses. What? Where is he? Where is he? I don't think they considered me God. But the things we've learned here, going around, I remember my dear friend Jack Valenti told me, you want to make a point, there's 6 important words. Let me tell you a story. And I would listen to the stories I'd hear. And we found out about how you can heat homes in the winter. And so many people in Vermont and across the country had a choice. You heat or eat. You can't do both. And that's why I've made a priority with LIHEAP every year and added to it in the latest appropriations bill. And there'll be a tad more in the next appropriations bill. Food for families. What can you do to help in domestic violence? And that, somebody applauded me on the Violence Against Women Act. I told them the number of times when I was state's attorney, I'd get called to the hospital at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. When somebody had been battered, they never had a place to go. And I was there not to be able to get evidence from them what to do. I was there to order their autopsy. And I've had nightmares about that. Some of the bodies I saw, because if anybody had known, we could have stopped it. And so we started in the state's attorney's office. Friends, some here, helped fund a safe place for a battered person to go and seek help. And then we could go after the person doing it. And so when I added, reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act with Joe Biden, that brilliantly started as the chair of the Judiciary Committee, I was joined by a conservative Republican from Western State, Mike Crapo. And he joined me because the Native American community was not covered. They had to go to tribal courts, and if the abuser was not a member of the tribe, get out scot-free. So we added that, working side by side. We added the LGBTQ community. Again, he got pressure from Republicans, and he said, and this goes back to the days I'd hear from Hubert Humphrey, I gave my word. And when Pat Leahy gives his word, he never breaks it. I'm not going to break mine. And we got it through, and then as it was going through the Senate, we said, by the way, we have another little amendment, only about 50 pages. And it's to protect adolescents, runaways, from sexual predators. Because we just had a study showing that the large percentage of them are followed by sexual predators. And we upped the crime, the penalties, and put in money to help save these young children. And it passed. And when President Obama called me at home that night to thank me for doing it, I said, call Mike Crapo, conservative Republican. He kept his word, and he kept votes on his side, and we were able to do it in ours. And we've done that in so many things, prescription drug, banning landmines. You know, Marcel and I have gone to some of these sites in war zones where people have lost their limbs from landmines or their lives, oftentimes children. Rarely combatants, they're all non-combatants. And came back, passed the first law in the world to ban the export of landmine, and then expand the Leahy War Victims Fund around the world. Marcel's gone in as a nurse to check on these people, sometimes in the worst, most primitive areas. But it works. Quiet negotiations with Cuba. And can I tell you a little story? I don't want to go too long, but Raul Castro, I had met with Fidel Castro, who was down there, and he invited me and Senator Reed from, Jack Reed from Rhode Island, and we had got to be less serious, but I said, well, Jack, tell the president what you say about me. Now, Jack's about 5'7", but he speaks perfect Spanish. He said, oh yeah, I have to introduce her to things. And I say, now look, the big guy thinks he's really important. He's not, but be nice to him and act like he's important. Then come talk to me, I'm the really important one. And Castro, would never allow anybody to talk to them, but turned to me and said, you know what he was saying? I said, we do it everywhere. So we got along well with that, and when Elian Gonzalez was here and we're getting back to his father, I used my back channel with him to say, but we don't want any parade in Cuba saying, boy, did we get the U.S.? And he said, no, his father would get a better apartment, a better job, but there would be no condemnation of the U.S. And he kept his word. So I went down after with a small delegation of senators, both parties, and no American official had met with Raul Castro. We were having dinner, or about to have dinner, got a call. It was Castro, invited me to come and meet with him. I said, well, is it okay if I bring my wife? Hello? Is it okay if I? Yes, okay. I have a whole delegation here. I don't want to see a whole delegation. Well, can I, to make it bipartisan, can I bring the senior Republican? That was Dick Shelby. Mutter, 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 mutter. Okay, so I did. When we get in there, but I showed my diplomatic skills. I said, well, you know, we're of an age where I'm older than you are. So, okay, I'm doing well. But in our country, we remember what you did wrong. You remember what we did wrong. You're a bigger country. You did more things wrong. And I said, well, wouldn't it be nice if our children and grandchildren to see a different world? I have a great-granddaughter. Marcel said, oh, Mr. President, do you have a picture of her? Why, yes, I do. Isn't she beautiful? Do you have great-grandchildren? No, we have grandchildren. How old is she? Well, we have a great-granddaughter the same age. What's her name? Sophia. Do you have pictures? No. All our cameras and electronics were locked up in a secure safe in our airplane. He said, bring it next time you come. And the whole attitude changed. And then he said, Dick Shelby's wife, Dr. Annette Shelby, do you know anything about Cuba? Well, she was a professor at Georgetown. She said, I've had a number of Cuban students. Really? The half-hour meeting became several hours. And he walks us down, opens the car door for us. And we kept up this correspondence. And when Alan Gross was held in prison, I would bring messages back and forth, unsigned. Plain piece of paper from President Obama, and I could tell Castro that was from the president. He would send back a letter, plain paper, not signed, but I could tell President Obama who it was from. And this all led to the time we got Alan Gross out of prison. They got the Cubans back there, and we also got one of our intelligence people was being covered. We had 3 airplanes left from Andrews at about 6 o'clock in the morning. One was the president's plane with Alan's wife and then congressman from his state, now senator. And we went down and we were on the ground 35 minutes and flew back. A man released from prison did not know he was going to be released. And about 5:30 that morning, they came to him and said, pick up everything you have in your cell. And they brought him to this reception room. He looks out and sees this huge blue and white airplane with the United States of America on the side. First person down steps was our son-in-law, was one of President Obama's photographers. And he's African American, and Alan had seen pictures of him, and that looks familiar. And then Alan and his wife and the rest of us came down. And I remember walking in there and saying, Alan, you want to go home? I said, I do, Patrick. We hugged each other. 35 minutes later, we were airborne. We were sitting there looking at the big TV set just after I pointed out the window that we were over the United States. And he was back, and Chris Van Hollen was pointing out parts of Florida to him. We're watching this big TV set at the conference room, and somebody comes on and says, there's an unconfirmed report that Alan Gross has been released. He goes, I'll confirm it. And then one of my favorite photographs, he got the steward came and said, Mr. Gross, would you have time to take a call from the president? I said, Alan, it's his airplane. He said, oh, I'm going to take the call. And he said, you want to come? I said, no. He went to the president's office. I waited outside. They told me when the call was over, and I walked in. He and his wife, remember, he'd been in prison now for 5 years. And they stand behind the president's chair, one hand on the other's hand, just looking at each other. I took the picture. And I said, how do you feel? He says, better, better. And, you know, it's, those are things that make it feel very well. I think of the ads we've run in my early days where Marcel was always a star. We had one, we changed the voting time, and I said, are we sure we have to vote early? And she said, yes, they changed the date of the primary and on, and I said, well, Jim Condos knows this one. I said, well, are you going to vote for me? She said, do I get a bumper sticker? Now, we only ran it 2 or 3 times. But here's the difference between, you run negative ads, everybody turn that off. Everywhere we'd go, total strangers would come up to us and say, Marcel, did you get the bumper sticker? I said, I hope the hell she did. But I don't want to bore you with too many stories, but I think that what you have to do to be yourself, be honest. I don't like negative ads. I've never run one, but I find that people want to hear from you. I'm worried about the Senate, and Peter, you're going to have to make it better. I was urged for years to write a book, and this is not an ad. I wrote a book called The Road Taken. We'd actually had most of it finished 2 or 3 years ago. And then January 6th hit. And we held off, but I was going to write about that. I did not realize that I would become the first senator and Senate President pro tem to preside over the impeachment trial of a former president. And I took copious notes. But I went back and looked at my notes the other day, and the first thing I'd written at the top before the trial started, I said, I am ready. I am ready. I am ready. And that's because of the trust all of you have put in me over the years, that I could be there and do whatever was the best and most honest Vermont way. And I did. And I think the book is called The Road Taken. As you know, Robert Frost, 2 paths and the road diverged, and I took the one less traveled by, and that's made all the difference. I took that road less traveled by, knowing that nobody in my party had ever been elected, but I took it with Marcel, and I took it with everybody in this room, and that made all the difference. And because you were always there, I could cast the tough votes. I could do the things that needed to be done. I could say, this is Vermont. This is the way we feel because we have a conscience. And let's bring the country back to that time. Let's bring the United States Senate back to that time. Let's show adherence to our Constitution. Let us respect the laws of this country and be the great nation we should be. Thank you. Marcel and I were married 60 years ago, and when I spent 30 days in the hospital this spring with the 2 surgeries on my hip, then had to learn how to walk again, I had my own private nurse. I found that was an advantage, but I also found when you have a really good nurse, she tells you what to do, and you damn well better do it.